All right, guys, this is section 3.4, part 3, the last set of notes we're going to take. Section 3.4 dealt with quadratics. Okay, quadratics. And what's a quadratic? It has an x squared. That's the highest exponent. Okay. This one is more word problems, and you're going to have to write the equation. Okay, so let's go through. Let's see if we can set up the problem and write the equation, and then all we have to do is solve it. All right, you have a rectangular table that is 3 feet longer than it is wider. 3 feet longer than it is wider. So we have a rectangle. It is 3 feet longer than it is wide. So we're going to call this x. Okay, if this was 5, what would the length be? 3 more. So 5, 6, 7, 8, right? If this is 7, this would be 10, or 3 more. So we don't know what this is. So this is x plus 3. It's 3 more. Okay? All right, how do we find the area of a rectangle? Area of a rectangle is length times width. Okay, length times width. So we've got x times x plus 3. All right, what do we know here? If it has an area of 24 square feet, what are its dimensions? So we know the area, we know this number. This number is 24. Okay. All right, so we want to solve for x, because then we'll know what this is. We'll add 3 more, and we'll know what that is. Okay. How do I solve this, though? This is a quadratic. It might not look like it, but this is a quadratic. Now, it's factored, which would normally be great, but it's only nice if it's factored when this side is 0. So this isn't helping us out very much. So we need to actually go ahead and distribute this. X squared plus 3x. Okay. Then we need everything on one side. So we're going to subtract 24. So with an x squared, you need everything to one side, and it needs to equal 0. So x squared plus 3x minus 24. And I don't think that factors. I wish it did, right? 8 and 3, if that was a 5, that would have been perfect. But that's okay. If it doesn't factor, then what do? We use the quadratic formula. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, let me get my pencil. A is the number in front of the squared, so a is 1. B is the 3. And c, make sure you take the sign with. So c is negative 24. So x equals the opposite of b. So it's actually going to equal negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1. And just be careful, c is a negative 24. Okay. All over 2 times a, and a is a 1. Okay. So negative 3 plus or minus the square root, and this is 2. All right, grab your calculator. Type in, I'm just going to type this underneath, 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 24. Okay. Oh, dear. I didn't type that in right. 3 squared, then I have to bring it down on this calculator, minus 4 times 1 times a negative 24. That looks better. 105. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my calculator. I'm going to do negative 3 plus the square root of 105 divided by 2, and then negative 3 minus the square root of 105 divided by 2. So I'm going to do negative 3 plus the square root of 105. Now I like to hit enter when I'm done with the top, and then divide by 2. So negative 3 plus the square root of 105 divided by 2. And I think the book, make sure you read, I think it says like round to one place. So this is 3.6. Okay. And then the other one is -3 minus the square root of 105. I like to hit enter and then divide by 2. Now this gives me -6.6. Okay. And don't panic. That's okay. Sometimes the negative is a true statement. It just doesn't fit our situation. This equation doesn't know our situation. So if it's negative, that's okay. We're just going to toss it. Okay. All right, so x is 3.6. Let me write it. X is 3.6. And then this is 3.6 plus 3. So 6.6. And sometimes that does happen, that this other positive answer actually happens to match the negative one. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So just be a little cautious, but if it kind of does work out, you're like, oh, perfect, that works. All right, so our answers are 3.6 by 6.6. 3 feet longer. Let's see, the table is 3 feet longer than its width. So technically this would be the width. And then that would be the length. Okay. All right. Good. All right. The hardest part is drawing it. So make sure that you take these drawings to the homework. Okay. You have made a quilt that is 4 feet by 6 feet. So you have a quilt that is 4 feet by 6 feet. You still want to put a border on it. You want the border to be uniform in width. So that means you're going to put an extra kind of border right all the way around. And you want it to be the same distance all the way around. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. With the border, you want to have a total area of 48 square feet. What should the width of the border be? So this distance is x. That's the question. How thick should that be? But remember, it goes all the way around. That x is everywhere. So what is the length of this? What is the length of that red line? Well, how much is it going up? That's part of the border. The border's all a distance of x. Down here, that's the border. That's a width of x. So this whole distance here is x plus 4 plus x. X plus 4 plus x. X plus 4 plus x. Now, we write that a little bit nicer, or a little bit different. We write this as 2x plus 4, right? We can do x plus x, 2x plus 4. All right, let's do the green line. It's kind of the same as blue, but what is the length of that line? Because it says with the border, we have a total area, but that is with the border. Okay, so this distance is what? We've got this distance this way, which is x. Then we've got 6, and then we've got the border again, which is another x. So this green is x plus 6 plus x. A better way to write that, we can combine the x's, 2x plus 6. Okay. All right, and then how do we find the area? Area is length times width. This isn't writing very well. Let me... oh, that's right. Okay, so this, what's my length? Now this 48 includes the border. So I need 48, that's my area. My length, or it doesn't really matter, I guess we could call this the length. The length is 2x plus 6, and I have to take it times the width, which is 2x plus 4. Okay. So now kind of the same thing up here. We need it to equal 0. So even though it's nicely factored, because it doesn't equal 0, it doesn't help us. So 48 equals, we have to FOIL this. First gives us 4x squared. Outer gives us 8x. Inner gives us 12x. And last gives us 24. collect like terms here. So 4x squared plus 20x plus 24, but it still equals 48. We need it to equal 0. So we're going to minus 48. And then, so now we finally get our nice 0. 4x squared plus 20x. And then this gives us what? Minus 24. It actually takes us to minus 24. Okay. One thing, whether I'm going to do quadratic formula or I'm going to factor, notice a 4 goes into all of those numbers. So it's kind of nice to take the 4 out. That leaves you with x squared plus 5x minus 6. Okay. And this guy, this actually factors. We don't care about the 4. In fact, we could divide both sides by 4. Now that it's multiplication, that's a nice thing. When you factor it out, you're multiplying. So we could now divide both sides by 4, and we still have 0. Let me see if I can slide this over. So we've got, let me draw a line here. 0 equals, we've got x squared plus 5x minus 6. Okay, and that actually factors. What multiplies to negative 6, but adds to be 5. Now, if you're like, I didn't know that that factored, then do the quadratic formula. If you're like, I forgot to take out the 4, then just do the quadratic formula. You're just going to have bigger numbers, but if you use your calculator, you're okay. All right, so what multiplies to negative 6 but adds to be 5? X, what would it be? Minus 2 and x. Oh, wait a minute. Does that factor? Oh yeah, but it's not that, right? Because this is an issue, right? That's not going to work. Okay, so let's go back to the drawing board. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't factor. Let's try this. X minus 1 and x plus 6. So that multiplies to give you negative 6, but this adds to give you 1. Yeah, that one's actually trickier than we thought. Okay, so now it is negative 1 and positive 6. Someone was asking, but my answer is 1 and negative 6, because now remember, it's actually what makes this 0. Now you have to solve x minus 1 equals 0 and x plus 6 equals 0. And so that actually takes you, it actually changes the sign, right? So now your answer is 1 or your answer is negative 6. So the what you put in here, your final answer is always the opposite. The negative, we cannot have a negative distance. So this gets tossed. And what should the width of the border be? X was the width of the border. I don't have to do any more work. X was the width of the border, so I'm done. Okay, 1 foot, which is probably a little big, but that's okay. All right. Might look nice, a little bit thicker border. So that one, X was done. X was the width of the border. All right, let's go back. We've done some stuff with triangles. We can assume, maybe we shouldn't, but we can assume that that is a right angle. Probably should have been on there. It does tell us it's a right triangle. What is the value of X for the triangle below? So if it's a right angle or right triangle, then I think we can assume that that is the right angle. Okay, so what does that mean? If this is a right triangle and we're dealing with sides, we know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, which is the c? Which is the one that has to be by itself? The one across from the right angle. So we're going to do a, b, c. So we're going to do 10 squared plus, now just be careful, you have to put it with parentheses, x minus 4 squared equals x squared. Okay, so that looks a little crazy and it's going to take a little bit of work. Notice it's a quadratic because we have an x squared. This is not x squared minus 16. This is not x squared minus 16. So 10 squared is 100. That is 100. This you must write out twice. You must write it out twice. That's what the squared means. You have 2 of them. So you have to write it out twice and FOIL. First gives you x squared. Outer gives you negative 4x. Sorry, negative 4x. Inner gives you negative 4x. And then last, be careful of your negatives. Last gives you 16. Okay, we still have equals, we still have x squared, and we still have 100. Okay, so let's collect like terms. These two go together. All right, so we've got 100 plus x squared. This would be what? Minus 8x plus 16 equals x squared. Now, this is kind of cool. We can go ahead and also put, oh, we probably should have done it right away, right? These two go together. So we put those two together, but we can also put these two together. Okay, or now I could do it down here since I already rewrote it. I might as well put those two together. So we have 116 plus x squared minus 8x equals x squared. One side has to be 0. So I'm going to move this to the other side, but look what happens. When I subtract an x squared, they cancel here, they cancel here. And that's okay. It actually makes it easier. So it kind of was a quadratic, but simplifying, now it's just a linear. I've got 116 minus 8x equals 0. Okay. Now how do I solve that? How do I, once the x squared goes away, I don't want a 0 over here. I want numbers on one side, x's on the other. So now I'm going to add an 8x to both sides. Now that changes the whole game. Okay. So I'll write it over here. We've got, I can put it up here. I've got 116 equals 8x. 116 that cancels equals 8x. Okay, so I'll just write it up there. And then I want to divide both sides by 8. It doesn't go in there evenly. This is 14.5 equals x. Okay. So find the value of x. So we're good. We found x and we're good. All right, let's try 4. Find the value of x for the triangle, if the triangle below is a right triangle. So we can assume out of these 3 angles, since it's a right triangle, we'll assume that one is the right angle. Same exact thing, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. I just have to be careful which one is the c. The one across from the right angle is my c. The others, it doesn't really matter. We'll just call this a and b, but those two don't matter. C has to be the one across from the right angle. So I've got x minus 3 squared plus x squared equals 15 squared. Okay, same exact thing. That's first one. We're going to have to write twice and FOIL. So we've got x minus 3 times x minus 3. First gives me x squared. Outer gives me negative 3x. Inner gives me negative 3x. And then last gives me plus 9. Okay. Now, I still have this plus x squared. And I still have equals. Cut it off here. And what is 15 squared? And it equals 225. Okay, so that is all coming from that. Okay, so let's clean it up here so that we have a little bit more room, right? I can do x squared and x squared, so that gives me 2, make sure you guys can see, 2x squared. Negative 3x and negative 3x gives me negative 6x. And then I have plus 9 and equals 225. Okay, this one looks like it's staying a quadratic. That x squared isn't going anywhere. So I want everything on one side. So I want to subtract 225. Okay, and what do we have? We've got 2x squared minus 6x. 9 minus 225 is negative 216 equals 0. Okay, so there's my quadratic, and I equals 0. So now we're in good shape. So we got 3 choices. We can factor out a 2. We could, probably 2 choices. We could either factor out a 2 or go right to the quadratic formula. If you can see that they all can be divisible by 2, take that out. Because then you're at least working with smaller numbers. Negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. And if you don't know this, just do negative 216 Negative 216 divided by 2. You divide by whatever you take out. So that's negative 108. Oops, this should be negative 3x. Sorry. All right. And then, since we're multiplying, when you factor your multiplying, we can divide by 2 and get rid of it. So we're looking at x squared minus 3x minus 108 equals 0. Okay. Now, we can either do factor or quadratic formula. I think this one does factor. But if you don't see it, then let's do the quadratic formula. This is A, this is B, and this is C. Okay. So what do we have? I'll write it up here. X equals opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay. Remember, if you can factor it, go for it. If you can think of two numbers that multiply to negative 108 but add to be negative 3, you're in good shape. If you're like, I just got to use a quadratic formula, no big deal. X equals opposite of B, so just make sure you change the sign, so it's actually going to be positive 3, plus or minus the square root. Technically, it's negative 3, but you square everything. Oh, geez, you square everything. Okay, you square that negative, people. Square that negative. Negative B minus 4 times A, which is a 1, and C, which is a negative 108. Okay, square root goes over everything. All over 2 times A, which is a 1. Okay, let's see, we got 3 plus or minus the square root over 2. So it's very important that you put that negative 3 in parentheses when you're going to square it. Okay, that is a positive 9. That is a positive 9. The negative must be in parentheses. Minus 4 times 1 times a negative 108. Okay, and I should get 441. Let's see. So now I want to take the square root of 441. Okay, that was a perfect square that you might not have realized. Let's say you didn't realize it. So let's say you just did 3 plus the square root of 441 divided by 2. And then you would do, can you guys see, 3 minus the square root of 441 divided by 2. So if you're like, I didn't know that was a perfect square, that's okay. So let's type that into the calculator. 3 plus the square root of 441. I like to always hit enter and then divided by 2. So that gives me 12. And then 3 minus the square root of 441, enter, divided by 2, gives me negative 8. Or, I'm sorry, negative 9. Negative 9. There are a few cases, there are definitely cases where even though this is minus, you could get 2 positive answers. That is an option. So don't assume that one, just because this is minus, does not mean that one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Okay, that's what happens in a lot of word problems. But I just want you to remember that because this is plus and minus, you're going to have 2 answers. But it doesn't mean that you have to have one positive answer, one negative answer. Okay. All right. So, but in our case, if we have a situation, especially most of the time we're dealing with lengths or distance, the negative doesn't apply. And so x is 12. Okay. Let's see how many. There's 8 problems. Okay, so let's stop there. And then we'll pick up. This is kind of a good one because I have to do a little demonstration. So we'll stop there, and then part B we'll do 5 through 8. Halfway through, guys.